Yep. So my name is Ọmọlará Williams McAllister, and I'm a weaver, an artist, and a cultural organizer. I'm based here in Miami, originally from Atlanta. And I have a project called the Freedom School for Artists, which I'm just going to provide a little context around. So, the School for Artists is a popular education space that connects people, people to ideas, people to resources, and people to skills. The Freedom School takes its name from Freedom Summer, which was 1964. It was a collaboration between four political organizing organizations: CORE, the Congress for Racial Equality; SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee; SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Council; and SNCC, CORE, and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. And in Freedom Summer, their goal was to register as many Black folks in Mississippi to vote as possible as part of an attempt to get political power so people could determine the things that were impacting their life. They were facing Jim Crow laws and lots of voter discrimination in different ways. To help people get politically active, they established freedom schools. And freedom schools were popular education spaces where community people taught other community people how to use the resources that they had to make social change in their space. So the Freedom School for Artists, my project, is a freedom school in the tradition of freedom schools, and it's specifically for cultural organizers, artists, and creatives, and supporting them and having the skills, information, resources, tools that they need in order to be able to build power and create change in our communities. I'm really excited to host my first program on Masisi Radio today. Thank you all for having me. And I'm even more excited to have one of my beloveds, Amir Khadar, here to give a workshop on how to create flyers that are accessible in terms of disability and different ways people's brains work, and effective. Like, we actually just want to be able to know, like, when is the thing? Where is the thing? How do I get to the thing? How do I do it? So I'm going to let Amir take it away, and I'll be back maybe to ask some questions.
Okay.
Speak into the mic.
Into the mic. Hi, my name is Amir Khadar. I use they, them pronouns. I'm originally from Minneapolis and I've just been visiting Miami for the last month. It's been fantastic. And the outline for this workshop is we're going to start with a little bit of talk about my work and my art practice. Just closer. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about my work and my practice. I am a self-taught designer. So a lot of what I know, I just learned from like YouTube or the internet. And I don't have formal training in this. So I think the things I will say will probably be relevant to more people doing DIY projects. Maybe not as much to professionals. They might know some of these things already. And then I'm going to talk about what should go on a flyer just for basic accessibility. And when I say accessibility, I'm talking both about ADA compliance, American Disabilities Act, thinking about how people physically need certain things to look so they can actually physically read it, people with reading disabilities. And then also thinking about accessibility and comprehension for people who just don't think the same as you. Could be people with some form of neurodivergence, or people who are scrolling through an Instagram feed really fast and don't want to stare at a flyer as long as you did. And then we're going to create a theoretical event, and I'm going to show you my thought process to creating a flyer and how I make things look accessible. And we're going to talk about design hierarchy. We're going to go over some specific rules just to keep things as accessible as possible. And at the end, if there's any questions, I'll be here. Okay, so I'm good to switch to the iPad feed to start talking about my work. Beautiful. Fantastic. Turn it, yes. Okay. I did plan this in, what's the word? Vertical. I didn't think that part through. We can see if I can switch it. But first I'm just gonna start by talking about my art practice. This is all gonna be on my iPad and I'm using Procreate because Procreate is a very accessible program. You pay $10 once and you have it for the rest of your life. You never have to pay for an update. It's not like Adobe where you have to pay like $400 a year to use it, or else you don't have a job. Let's see, let me start with my work. Okay, so again, I'm a multidisciplinary artist, so I work in a lot of different contexts. the way that I got more into visual artwork was through illustration. I do a lot of work for nonprofits and local organizations that have justice-based motives. So I normally work on commission for these illustrations, and they'll have a specific cause or a thing that they're trying to promote, and I'll create artwork for it that translates the visual, the more contextual parts of the movement into a visual for usage in multiple spaces. Sometimes it's like posters. Sometimes it's like a gift to someone who donates money to an organization. Um, I just enjoy the process of art making, and I try to think about how I can creatively approach, whatever problem it is that I've been presented with. I do a lot of hand lettering. I really love just drawing as opposed to fonts. I'm going to try to use fonts on Procreate. I think they're very ugly and boring, but I will find some workarounds for them. Um, this was a poster for a group in Minnesota who is anti-youth incarceration. This is a poster from a while ago. I primarily work with groups that are centered around LGBTQ, some type of racial rights or environmental justice. This is a book cover I did. I didn't do the text layout, but I thought they did good on the text layout, so I'm putting it in. And again, my practice is multidisciplinary. For a lot of time this month, I've been at what's it called? IS Projects, which is the Miami Paper and Print Museum. And I've been there with Ọmọlará and everyone else there. And I've been trying to learn printmaking. I did it in high school, but I've been translating a lot of my work to prints, and it's been a really fun time. Just because right now I'm traveling, so I don't really have major goals. I'm just trying to re-up on my artistic education. But outside of the digital art, I do have a textile arts practice, which is where I probably pour most of my time into. These are weavings I did on a digital loom, maybe a month or two ago, where I was just translating a lot of my illustration work into weavings. Because I really do just love the tactile process of weaving. I also love the ancestral connection of it all. And I feel like it's a very good receptacle for my drawing practice, because I think the main thing that anchors me in all my artistic process is drawing. And drawing just as a very fluid and open form of making things. Yeah, this is one other piece. I think that's a good introduction for me. I don't know if I said my pronouns are they, them. That is important. Anyways, we can get started on the actual tutorial. So or the workshop, but what we should get started with talking about is what goes onto a flyer. I think it makes most sense to think about what types of information that we want to communicate before we think about how we want to communicate it. And a guiding principle I use to establish writing hierarchy, and also to work through, again, how do I translate information to people in a way that's legible. Can they hear the train? Okay. Okay, to translate information in a way that's legible, I try to use who, what, when, where, and why, and how as a framework to answer basic questions about what should go on the flyer and what shouldn't go on. I think flyers look best when there's the least amount of text on them, and whatever you need to communicate is communicated in as little words as possible. And that's, again, also because some people don't like to spend time reading. If you're posting something on social media, you usually want people to get all the information on it within 10 seconds. So you should have about 10 seconds worth of reading, which is less than half a paragraph for most people. But again, speaking to accessibility, sometimes 10 seconds of reading can just be a couple words. So that's just very important to keep in mind. When I say who, I would the way I would answer the who is, I would say, who is reading this flyer? That's more of an internal question. You should ask yourself who your audience is. Do they understand any cultural symbols? Do they know things about the events that you throw already? Do you have an insular community who doesn't need as much description? Because that will limit how much information you need to put on a flyer. Who is also can be who is hosting this event, and do they need to be on the flyer as well? What should be your description of what is going on? Is it a dance party? Is it a game night? Is it a clothing swap, etc.? Displayed in some way that your audience is legible to your audience. When is the event happening, as in day or time? where is where will this event happen physically? And again, thinking about who is seeing this flyer, might need to put more or less information on that. Like if it's a well-known location, you might not need to put the full address. You might need to just put the name of the place. And I also think about thinking about the context of what you're making. Where will it be seen? Like, will it be digital? Will it be printed in person? Because there's a lot of different contexts in which posters and flyers exist. And when you take that into mind, it also does impact how you should approach the design process. And why is sometimes optional. It does not always need to be there, but it's basically a statement that would say why an individual should care about what's going on. Because sometimes things have humanitarian influences, or something might be a benefit project for something else. So it's important to say that in a way that's also legible because it's a draw to the event. The how part can be, how does an audience member, what's it called, participate in this event, or how do they, or what logistics does the person need to go through to actually end up at this place? So it could be an RCP situation. You might need to email or go to a website, but that's what I would consider the how. And all of these things have different levels of importance on a flyer. In design, we use the word hierarchy to describe how information is delivered so that a person is able to see the most important thing first. And then after you catch their interest, it increases the amount of time they spend with whatever media that you have. So I think this is a good time to start the template. So for this, I have some design assets, and I created like a fake event that I have some words for that'll come up. But we're gonna start by using these name blocks as actual placeholders for text. Because when you're working with a flyer, text should be viewed as an image or a shape, not necessarily as words. Because I think when we think about them as words, we try to cram them into small spaces. But when we think about them as actual visual elements, we give them the space that they need to breathe, which is, again, very important in visual accessibility because people don't usually spend time with things that look busy or annoying. Okay. So the first step to creating a flyer should always be establishing a margin. I'm imagining this will go somewhere on social media like Instagram, but a margin is basically just a border around the edge of your design where no important elements will cross. So I just drew a square. Again, this is Procreate, so it's not going to be like too perfect, but it's going to be close enough. um, the purpose of a margin, again, is so that no important visual elements end up on the edge of your design. Because physically, if a person's holding a screen, that's the type of thing their thumb might go over, or someone might have to strain a little bit to see the edge of whatever your work is. So that's step number one. And then step number two is going to be to decide the order of importance of your elements. Um, I am going to be using a theoretical clothing swap event for this, and I have more detailed text about that. But for now, I think it's really important that if I'm hosting a clothing swap, people know what I'm hosting. And more specifically, I should have the title of the event be clothing swap over the title of the event being something else. And since it's a really important piece of information, you should use scale as a form to enforce hierarchy. So I'm going to make the what really big because it's the first thing I want people to see, and it's going to be the main draw. For the who, I'm imagining it'll be like local community people. And me as a person hosting this, it's not really important who I am. So I'm going to put it really small. And it's still going to be legible, but it's not going to be prominent. So it won't take away from the what's going on. The when and the where usually can go together in some way if there's proper spacing between them. So I'm going to plan to put them in the bottom left of the flyer. I'm going to resize that in a second. And for the why, I think for my event, I want it to be centered around some form of, mentorship for queer youth. So I'm going to have the why be big because that's another draw. And if this is a clothing swap, I need to explain to people what to bring and how to bring it. So I'm also going to put the house somewhere. I'm going to make it large in a prominent position, but I'm putting it in the bottom right corner. So this is, again, a very basic system for making a flyer. It's really important for accessibility purposes to establish a strong what's the word? A strong template. Because in American English, we always read top to bottom and then left to right. And based on that hierarchy, that means, again, the most important thing should usually be somewhere near the top, which is why I have my what up here. And the things that are more details or supporting information end up closer to the bottom. Because if someone is drawn into your event already, they're going to check, where is it? Can I physically get there? Does it fit in my schedule, etc. So we're going to get rid of that guide. And again, I already filled out the information for this flyer. Let me see where it is. Actually, first, let's go to the assets. These are some illustrations I made from several projects from a while ago. And we're going to talk about how to fit them inside of this design. So in general, I would say the rule is you want to keep your flyers to about 50-50, like 50% being space for text and 50% being space for language. That's the most accessible format. I do think sometimes it can look boring. So there's ways around it, and we're going to go over those. But for the purpose of this, I'm just going to go, easy to read and quick to do. So for the image, I chose an illustration I did a while ago of a person who is dark skinned and femme, because that's how I want to come to my event. And then I have some florals in the background because I love ornamentation and beautiful things. So I'm just going to position these somehow. And again, this is my artwork, so I can do whatever I want with it. But if you're going to use artwork for an event, it should be yours. You shouldn't just get it off the internet. And if you use somebody else's artwork, you should pay them or find a way to compensate them. Okay. So now that I've decided on what kind of assets I want and where I want them placed, you can see that I've already lost legibility of certain parts of the design. For example, the how is not legible, and the where and the when are also not legible because they're placed over text. And I could decide to put them inside of the negative space, which is, when I say negative space, I'm referring to this area above the image where the canvas is essentially blank. But I'm going to show some workarounds for how to have text placed in positive space as well. So now that I've picked my composition and I'm happy with it, I'm also going to pick a background color. With this color scheme, I would say like a shade of purple would probably look good, or like mauve. Let me see, it's not letting me drag. It's not letting me color fill. Give me 1 second. There we go. Okay. I don't exactly like that color, so I'm just going to shift it so it doesn't match perfectly. I like that. And I think I also want to incorporate a gradient because I love gradients. I think they're very juicy. Okay. So I'm happy with this as a design for now. We'll come back and edit things later. But now we're going to start to address the individual text elements and go more into what actually entails accessibility, again, from an ADA perspective, and then from just like a visual digestibility perspective. So first, when you're looking at the text, you can see, I would call this low contrast. The black and the purple, you can definitely like decide what's happening because the letters are large. But if the text was small, the difference in between the purple and the black is too small. And I made some more examples of what I mean when I'm talking about contrast, because there's other ways we can talk about it that aren't too difficult. So did I not name my flyer? There we go, text rules. Let me bring this to the top. Okay. I made a quick example of what I'm talking about with contrast. At the top, I have best contrast because by far the most legible thing that follows all ADA accessibility standards is black text on white background. We were taught to read that way for a very specific reason because nothing physically can pass that level of contrast. There's actually a scientific number used to talk about contrast percentages and relationships. But again, we can try our best to replicate that level of contrast with different colors and different backgrounds. So I have a couple examples that show, what a good contrast looks like versus a bad one. Light text on dark background, which is right here, wrong pen, generally is good. It's good for like shorter text, not for long text. But if we're working in the context of a flyer, a light text on a dark background is okay. An off color background that's like similar to white with black text is also fantastic. Again, another example of a more tinted color with a darker background and another tinted color with a background. Examples of bad contrast are things where you can't easily read what's happening just because you cannot see it. A good rule of thumb is to try to blur your eyes or blur your vision or squint your eyes. And if you can't easily see what's happening after your eyes are squinted, that means it's bad contrast. And there's plenty of ways to fix that. But in general, a light background needs a dark text color and a dark background needs a light text color. And ideally, your text should not be on a textured or colorful background or textured or inconsistent background. And there's ways to go about that we'll also figure out later. Another important thing for fonts, since we're on the topic of font, is the type of font you're using. Again, ADA accessibility standards say the best types of font to use are sans serif fonts. A serif is this thing right here. Oops, that's too big. This is a serif. It's like when you write a letter and then you add a foot to it. Serifs are okay to read. They were used like a lot, like in historical production. They're just not, I think they're out of style sometimes. I use the most basic serif and sans serif fonts, but again, the most legible thing in every context is a sans serif. I like Helvetica. It's really boring. Again, the fonts of Procreate are just not the best, but we're going to use it for the purpose of the workshop. And then there's sans serif fonts like Times New Roman, which have the foot. And then there are display fonts. This is like a mass simplification of typography. So there's a lot more categories in this, but a display font is generally a font that just has more flair to it. It can't be categorized as serif, sans serif, or typewriter, or just any classical definition of font. So they're usually a lot more fun and a lot more exciting, but you sacrifice legibility for them. And a good way, again, to text legibility, the reason that sans serif is so popular is because the line weight is consistent and the letters are always easy to read. So if I was to zoom out really far from this artboard, you can still see the sans serif font. Very easy, not super easy. I can see it easily. I don't know about other people. But the display font, for me, that disappears because the line weight is so small. And the issue with the serif font is that the line weight is inconsistent, so parts of the letters disappear. Which doesn't make it good for reading at all levels. But the way to work around this is by using scale. So if you're going to use a really fun font, like a display font, you just need to display it very large and in a prominent position. General rule to accessibility, again, with text is that the smaller things are, the more detailed, the less detailed they should be. And the larger they get, the more bold and complex decisions you can make about them. I think that's it for text rules. So we're going to go back to our flyer, which is behind everything. And we're going to start to, again, address these elements one by one and figure out how to make them accessible. So for me, I decided to make a little bit of copy. Again, nothing too serious, just some like made up locations and things to use as placeholders. I'm going to do a hand lettered title for the event because I love hand lettering, and maybe some doodles, and again, show how to handle the text that's in an inaccessible place. So for the type, I have a couple text blocks. They're all different colors. Let me see if I can just... I'm going to change them all to white because here I have a dark background. So white, again, is the color that makes most sense. If I wanted to add a tint to it, I could make it a very, very pale purple color. and that's okay. If I was to make it more purple or anything of a similar saturation, it now loses its legibility. Um, just for the general person, but then all again, like this does not follow ADA standards like at all. So for this part, I think we're titling it a queer clothing swap. So I'm gonna shift my words around. Who's hosting it is good girlfriends. I have a friend that's always talking about how you need some good girlfriends to get you together. And I'm gonna individually place these letters. I normally would not recommend this. I usually do text layout on the computer because there's a lot of alignment tools that allow you to keep text in a format that again is very legible. People are used to reading things that are left aligned or centered, sometimes right aligned too, but your text should follow the same alignment throughout the entirety of what you're doing, ideally. But I'm gonna have mine center aligned, or actually maybe I'll have mine like slightly skewed since it's the title. Again, since it's the title, you can do a little bit more with it. Like it doesn't have to be as strictly following accessibility rules. And then who's hosting it? Good girlfriends. We're gonna put the Y is gonna be it's for youth. Somehow. I'm not sure exactly how, but we'll figure this out. Huh? Yes, thank you. So this is gonna be for youth in some way. We're going to move the date towards the bottom. We're gonna move this how. Again, the how is like the call to action. What can you do? And I'm asking you to bring clothes in a range of sizes for all genders and occasions. And I'm also gonna put the where here. I'm realizing I actually swapped a couple things. I'm gonna fix those as well. Again, Procreate is not the best way to do this type of thing because you lose some consistency. So there's gonna be some things that look funky, but the message will be there. Okay, so now this is mostly left aligned. And I'm also gonna move the date up here because I think that makes sense. It's important to think about spacing when you're placing text as well, because we read spaces and gaps as ways to connect information to each other. So here I put the date and the location a little bit too close, so I'm just gonna add a small space. That's important for legibility because if you're thinking about people who are maybe using screen readers as your event, it needs that gap or else it'll all get read in one block. Because screen readers can read from photos a lot of the time. They're not only made to read from text. So now I have most of my things laid out. I can get rid of my template because it's not helping me anymore. And I can start to address the individual elements. So for the title, again, I want to do some type of hand lettering. And if you're ever doing hand lettering, I would always suggest you start with a base font or you start with very strict lines that define where you can and cannot go. What I mean by strict lines is it's like when you're writing on a piece of paper, you have a line above what you're writing, a line below, and then some type of midline. And having an established baseline, and the middle line is called your X height, but having established mid baseline and X height is actually what makes fonts accessible or not. Because fonts that do not have that generally have too much variation in them to the point that they get difficult to read. So for this part, I'm just gonna make sure I'm working in a new layer. And I think I want like more of a paper cut aesthetic. So I'm gonna use the selection tool. Again, I'm not gonna show you how to use Procreate. Oh, I'm not gonna show you exactly how to use Procreate, but if you can figure this stuff out if you're like dedicated to it. And that looks absolutely terrible. Let me try this one more time. I don't like how that looks. So I'm actually just gonna hand draw the letters. And I'm gonna use a slightly different color just so I can see what I'm doing. I'm also making sure that the title is in all caps because all caps is another way that people are able to make things more accessible. Because some fonts, the lower caps, when they flip, they look too similar to other letters. Like a B and a D might look too similar, an A and an H might look too similar. So if you're using a font that isn't easy to read, you should probably keep things in all caps. Okay. So we're just gonna get rid of that part in my copy since I have my own version of it. I usually would spend more time on handwriting, but for now that looks decent. Um, it's definitely helping with the aesthetic of the flyer. And for the rest of the flyer, I am probably just gonna keep the sans serif font. Yeah. It's missing some allure, but I'll come back and address that later. For these pieces down here that do not have backing, again, they lose their accessibility because there's points where this design is crossing with the background element that I'm talking about, like right here specifically, where the contrast of this white between the plant shape isn't high enough. So to solve that, there's a couple things you can do. On some design programs, you can create an outline around the letters that's a different color. So if I was able to create an outline that was the same color as the background, behind the text, of course. And again, I'm just hand drawing this in. There we go. Now it pops out a lot more from the background than it did before. I would use a thicker margin for something like this just because the text is so small. But normally by the time someone gets down to thinking about the date of an event or the location, they've already decided they want to go, so they'll zoom in to find information. And we're gonna do the same for this piece of text below. We're actually gonna do an underlay, which is something I see used a lot in flyers. Is something I use a lot too because it just makes things easier to see, and it also places something at a different point in the hierarchy. So when I'm talking about an underlay, I mean a block of color that goes behind your information that acts as a separate frame. So normally I would not do an underlay unless a piece of information was very important, because now that this information has a backing to it, it is actually higher in the visual hierarchy, to the point that if someone looks at this flyer, they might look at the address first because it's just more visually interesting. So a way to fix that is to change the color. So I'm actually gonna make this lighter shade of purple. I'm gonna make both a lighter shade of purple. And since the shade of purple here is lighter, I'm going to use a darker color to color them in. And now we've maintained some semblance of accessibility. From a design perspective, this looks boring, and accessibility does not have to be boring. So I'm going to think about other parts of my design that have interest in them. Like this person is wearing jewels, and I like the pattern I made on the jewels. So I can just go ahead and add that jeweled pattern to the edge of these text boxes. because everything in here, again, is just, we don't really have to worry too much about it being, what's the word, inaccessible at this point. So I'm just adding similar pattern. And I like the multicolored dots, so I might add some of that in. And the border did make it look more interesting than the title. So this is like where the design process would really start now that you have like your base template down. You would just spend time thinking about like what looks good, what doesn't look good, how do I accent the information that's important to me, and just how to make things look pretty. I would say like accessibility and beauty are probably the number one important things in all design work. Things should not be ugly. Because they're not interesting that way. So I'm going to continue playing around with this. Adding in more assets. Again, these are my assets. Another example of what happens when your text is big is that having this graphic directly behind the major text is not obscured as much. So I could play around with adding it as like an overlay. That adds a slight amount of texture to the background, but not enough that it disturbs the text hierarchy that we've already created. Maybe I can play with the text some. I like to do, a thing I like to do to make text glow on Procreate is to change the color of the text itself. So I'd make it a little bit darker. I think that's a good color. And then I have a layer in the background that I would turn into, there's a function, I think it's called bloom. Yes, bloom. And it adds like a glow to things that I think is really interesting. I don't know if it makes the most sense here, but I'm pleased with that for now. And I can make it fit my color scheme more, so I could make it gold and see if the gold doesn't add too much contrast. And that looks crazy, so I'll take it back. Let me see if the teal works. I think that looks like decent, reasonable. Thank you. And then again, you just keep on playing around with things. I think that's the majority of what I wanted to address. Are there any questions from the audience? Thank you for asking that question. I actually prepared for this question. The question was, what are the most common mistakes people make in terms of accessibility in their flyer design? So I pulled a few flyers from the internet that seem to be made by like unnamed people. I hope, they don't see this. Exactly, actually. Critique is good for growth. So these are some flyers. First of all, this is an amazing flyer. I saw this for the Caribbean Cunt event that's happening tonight. I looked at this one and I was like, this is actually perfect for many reasons. First, I would say the use of color is actually very complex. Red on green is like one of the worst color combos because it vibrates in a way that's just very displeasing to the eye. But it has many overlays behind it that make it very easy to perceive. Like you have a layer of black. Let me add a drawing layer too so I can express. But there's a layer of black and then a layer of yellow and then the green. And on the green, the only text that's visible has a white background. So for many reasons, this is like a highly what's the word, highly complex background, but you're still able to read everything, comprehend it easily. It also follows a classic hierarchy of most important information is at the top, which is the who and the what. And you see what time it is very quickly, the when, this is also the when. You see where down here, and more things that interest you, people you probably know and love. Then I just pulled this up on the internet as a bad example of text layout. Again, I don't know who did this, but I saw it and I was like, oh, this is like terrible and easy to talk about. When you look at this, it's literally impossible to read. Like, it doesn't matter that it's pixelated, regardless of how much you zoom in. The person chose to lay text over an image without changing the value of the image. And I'm going to go over a little bit how to look at images, which is another piece that I planned that I forgot about. um, but again, this part is just, there's issues with the text size, issues with the font, the spacing between the letters, impossible to read. This is another flyer I found where there's just too much going on, to the point that I don't know if this was AI generated, because some of the letters aren't like, it is AI. It was giving AI. Okay. But it's impossible to read because AI doesn't know what we need to look at. But just seeing it, it's way too busy. Too much is going on. There's no like real hierarchy established. So if this was on social media, I probably would scroll past it. It's also not in a visual language I understand at all. I found this flyer, which was boring, but very like straightforward, very easy to do and accessible. You can see all the text, very big. It's all in the same color, all in the same font. You don't have to strain to read it. Straightforward, the best way to do things. Let me see if I have any of the bad ones. This one I thought was gorgeous, but it's actually bad. A standard test you can use to decide if text is accessible is actually flipping it. So I can just flip this image here, which actually, I don't even know if it's not in English, but I also could not tell if it was in English or not, which isn't the best thing. But when you flip text backwards, the characters should essentially read the same. And one thing I noticed about this font that they were using was that this A, when it's flipped backwards, could sometimes look like an E. It flipped again. I was also noticing that just when you look at this ABR right here, they almost all could be the same letter if you have some type of reading disability. And I have dyslexia, so I flip letters backwards sometimes. So I couldn't tell what the characters were saying. Even if it's in a different language, you should be able to make out like English characters. I really love this Tierra Whack poster. It's a concert poster. It says her name twice in two different fonts. Once in a font that up here, the font is not the most accessible. Oop, where's my layer? Up here, the font is not the most accessible, but it repeats her name again at the bottom in a very accessible font, which is a workaround for trying to use something that's more ornamental or decorative or interesting, but also balancing it with readability. Another way to balance readability is always to have a full text version of your flyer inside of whatever caption of wherever you're posting it. Sometimes it's also not a bad idea to have a black and white version of a flyer, even though, again, it's not the most beautiful. It's very functional. I found this piece that was like design work from a student. I don't know who, but I thought it was interesting because here the purpose of the text is completely ornamental. We know who this person is and we don't actually have to read their name to deduce who they are. So in this situation, the text does not have to be legible or visible. So this is a situation where someone could decide like, oh, I don't want to spend the time and space required to make something look legible because it might be ugly. So they can just use an image of the person and it works out fine. I think these are some good flyers. I like this flyer too. Very interesting, good color scheme. I mostly picked out things I liked. I did see this flyer, which was one that I thought was like designed very interestingly. But again, they have the issue of red text on a green background, which is right here. It's not readable. This yellow text on a green background, also not readable. Yes. Is there anything else I should look at? I have a photo. I was gonna do a photo version of the flyer, but I don't think I have time for that. But just a quick look at photos. In general, photos have things going on in the background. I found this photo that I thought would be good for a flyer. It's just from, I use nappy.com. It is a Black-owned free stock photo website. That's how I get a lot of my photos, royalty free. You don't have to pay for them. And I thought this photo was interesting because it has a background, or there's things happening in the background that aren't actually essential to the image. So if I wanted to do a flyer of this to make some negative space, I could just carve out a space around her face. And now I've created negative space to put text and information. And that's how you can work photos into things. I would also highly suggest just working with photos that have an ample amount of negative space. Like I found this one that would have been perfect for a clothing swap. Is there any other questions?
Do you think like design can you read for like if you know some like if you want social media or if you want something printed or kind of all the same?
The rules change sometimes because for print, you have to think about the distance that the person will be standing from the flyer itself. So or I should also repeat the question. The question was, how do we consider different formats for design process? So if something will be printed versus if something will be online, how do you approach that differently? And what I was saying was things in print, you have to think about the distance at which someone will interact with the information, because distance is, it's an illusion. It's not real. So when you're close to something, it appears big, but when you're far away, it appears small. It's called visual height or visual depth. So when you're designing for a flyer that's meant to be seen from a far distance, you need to have larger text, or the flyer itself just needs to be larger. But if your flyer is the side of a Post-it note, you have to know that people need to hold it in their hands, like a business card or something like that. There's also different like colors that are usable online versus in real life, but that's a whole nother, it's a different topic. Yeah. A tool for what? Yes, the question was, is there a tool you can use to check accessibility? Just to make sure things are correct. There are a couple websites that I think, again, use the scientific metrics of color and size to tell you something is correct. I usually just will look up a thing called a contrast checker. I just Google that, and normally the first thing that comes up is a website that lets you put in the color of the text and the color of the background, and it will just let you know if that is accessible by ADA standards or not. And I don't remember the name of the website exactly, but that's generally what I use when I do layout work, for, you know, just my day-to-day work. Are we good? Okay. Yeah. So the question is, how do I know if something is pretty? Um, it's a good question. It's philosophical, actually. I think for me, I define beauty as, I like when things have a flow to them, when they're built in like a similar visual language. I think like gradients and consistent color schemes are beautiful. Like when I'm picking my colors, I usually physically look at the color wheel and draw a shape on it. And I abide by the rules of that shape. I don't really stray too much. Like when I'm talking about the color wheel, I'm just talking about this thing right here. Because there's a scientific reason for why the colors are placed at the position that they are. Colors directly across from each other, contrasting, etc. I like things. I also would consider ease of digestion as a part of beauty. I like it when text is in a negative space of something more than when it's in positive space. I think I also love it when people approach text and font and type just as like ornamental objects as opposed to things that like they begrudgingly put on something. I think in my head those things create beauty, but it's all subjective. It's all subjective. Did I answer the question? Okay. Okay. So the question is how do I create a cohesive color palette? Should it be complementary, etc. So we can look at a piece of my work I did because I think it makes more sense in this context. Let me see if there's two things. I might have used the same color scheme multiple times. Let's start with this piece that's all blue, which is a monochromatic color scheme. A monochromatic color scheme comes when you use the same color at different saturations and values. So this is 3 shades of blue because one is like a very dark, let me add another layer on top. Because one shade of blue is like a very dark value, almost black. Then one shade of blue is a mid-tone and one shade of blue is a highlight. I'm able to create form and image and content in a way that would not happen if all these colors were in the same value spectrum. And what I mean by that is this shade of blue, when it's on the color wheel, it's in this position. But if I was trying to create like a darker shade of blue and it actually was just the same value or saturation, it doesn't create as much variety in the color scheme. So I like it when you can adjust things in a way like that. Here I used, or I guess there too, I primarily use shades of green and shades of reds and oranges. Green and red are contrasting colors. I personally really love contrasting colors. I think they're a way to build a really strong color scheme very quickly. I don't think you should ever just use like the straight up colors like red and green, but here I use the more orange shade of red and a more yellow shade of green. So I'm just mixing colors together in different ways. It also creates interest and movement around your piece when you have a strong presence of one color and then a contrast color used as like a pop out. And I think in general, if you're depicting people with brown skin, you should always remember that brown is a desaturated shade of red or orange. So usually shades of green and shades of, wait, green or orange? Shades of purple? Not purple. Blue. 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 I lost myself. And shades of blue very much complement our skin tone. Obviously, we can do any color. Like, you can make any color work. I'm just thinking about complementary color schemes, but there's like a lot of different ways to decide color. Do I have time? Am I good? Huh? Oh, we do. Okay, I'll do the last question. That is such an amazing question. Thank you for posing it. The question is, where can you find my work? My website is Amir Khadar.com. There's only one. And my Instagram is at Amir.Khadar because there is another one there. And in terms of work, for hire, I do graphic design. I do report layouts. I do illustration. I do teaching. I really want to do a fashion collaboration. If anybody knows someone that can put me on, I would do that. I have sewing skills. I do technical sewing if I have to, and I can do design consultation as well. Another question. Currently, most of my work is not for sale. You can reach out to me personally. I want to hold on to it. Like, I need the value to go up first. That's you sell it. Okay. I am making prints actively. I forgot about that. I'm going to be I've been making prints at the paper studio. And these will be for sale soon. I'm gonna advertise it on my Instagram. Right now the algorithm does not like me, so it might not be soon. We're gonna have to rebuild our relationship and then I'll post about them. Because I would like them to sell. But yeah, I did make some prints, some edition prints, and that'll be a more accessible item of mine. And I sometimes do sell digital prints as well. That's it. All right. Thank you so much. Okay.